Now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of what Indians are all about.
I still say we Indian people are believers in the truth. This is the way of life that was given to your people. You're born an Indian, you're going to die an Indian. Indianness is a good life. You're facing an Indian this afternoon.
Good Saturday afternoon out there, everyone. Welcome to your number one source for Native American television news, Native News Today. I'm your host, Jason Salzman, joining you here in the Muscogee Media Studios as we prepare for this week's episode. A lot of things going on here around the Muscogee Creek Nation. Want to remind you all to follow us on MuscogeeMedia.com as I always do each week, but got a lot of great content up this week on our social media sites. We're doing a little bit of rebranding around the office and stuff, so come by and come in and see us sometime and see what we've done with the place. Also, got a lot of back to school giveaways. It's time to go back to school for a lot of kids. We wanted to get in on that with our promotions, so back to school giveaways as well to look at on our Facebook sites, as well as a report from this week's Health, Education, and Welfare Committee meeting at the National Council Chambers. So lots of things on there to see this week, as well as lots of things to get to in this week's episode. We're so very excited to be able to bring you your news concerning mostly Muscogee Creek Nation. That's who we cover, that's who we are, but all tribes as well here around American Indian country. And speaking of all tribes, somebody that has the responsibility of listening, looking after, and taking the message of all tribes to the top official in this state is the Oklahoma Secretary of State. He's also the Secretary of Native American Affairs. Mr. Chris Benge is joining us in studio today. A little bit about Chris, Cherokee citizen from over around the Berry Hill area. Chris was kind enough to grant us an interview, visit us here at Muscogee Media here recently. In addition to his responsibilities as the Oklahoma Secretary of State, also visiting lots of tribal nations as well, putting out a report on his findings. So we were so very happy to welcome into studio the Secretary of State for Oklahoma, Mr. Chris Benge. Pleased to have in studio now with us the Secretary of State here in Oklahoma, also Secretary of Indian Affairs, Mr. Chris Benge. And Mr. Benge, thank you for being with us today here in studio with Native News Today.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here with you today.
Well, you've been in your capacity there, Secretary of Indian Affairs, probably a little over a year now. I think last February was when you first took the office there. How have things been? And it looks like you had a pretty successful 2015 from the report.
I'm glad you got to see the report, because I was gonna mention that we filed the annual report as is required by the person holding that liaison position. But it's been a busy year. It's been a year of learning, and I've learned a great deal meeting with tribal leaders. We had 147, if you want to call them official visits in calendar year 15 based on our calendar. We had a lot more interactions with tribal citizens and leaders beyond that. But I really think that, my message as I've gone out and about has been respect and collaboration. And one, I want to show great respect to the tribal culture and history. And then I want to be able to find ways that the state and the tribes can work together to build a stronger relationship and try to address issues that we all have in common.
Right. And you talked, I'm glad you mentioned that the sort of change in structure. We had that one liaison that sort of looked over everything. Now we have departments of the state, and let's just, for example, education or substance mental health issues, transportation. They each have a tribal liaison as part of those departments now. Do you like the way that's structured? Have you saw some success with that?
So I love the structure, and it fits my philosophy. Whenever I was Speaker of the House in the Oklahoma legislature, I tried to build a strong team, and I tried to find people who were talented at what they had strong skill sets to bring to the table. And these liaisons that we have throughout the agencies are people like that. They're passionate about Native American issues. They want to help, and they were just so happy that we would meet with them on a quarterly basis like we do and interact with one another and find out what's going on and try to help. And they were very, you're talking about people who work in bureaucracies, large bureaucracies, and so to be able to have an opportunity to kind of come up toward the surface and kind of broadcast what they're doing They've been very passionate about it, and I think the model works very well because it's team-oriented. We kind of decentralize our efforts, our monitoring, so it's not just my office and me and my deputy, Brian Hendricks. We have team members out there, and so I think we have great coverage because of that.
Brian Hendricks himself, a Muscogee Creek citizen, much like us here at Muscogee Creek Nation. Now, Secretary Benge, I'm glad you also said, talking about team building and in your stead as there at the representatives and legislature, it seems too that we're having more and more legislatures that are tribal citizens themselves. Jerry McPeak, Lisa Billy, just a couple names to throw out there. And now we have the Native American Caucus, so that helps what you're doing as well.
It does, yeah. And I have to give Lisa Billy a lot of credit for starting that Native American Caucus about 10 years ago, and I've seen it grow, and it's grown a lot, and you have more and more members. And I think what's happening is the legislature is learning more about Native issues. And bottom line, that's why it was created.
Yeah, and I think what was neat too, when talking with Lisa not too long ago, she told me that now people are coming to her wanting to be part of the Native American, she doesn't have to go and recruit members or anything like that. They're really wanting to be a part of it. That's a great thing. We talk about state tribal issues, the state and tribes, and here in Oklahoma, 38 federally recognized tribes, 3/4 of the state covered in tribal jurisdiction. There's no way to get past having to work together as municipalities, Oklahoma government, tribal governments. Have you, in the last few years, we've seen even those negotiations and partnerships, they've had to ramp up as the tribes themselves have become bigger players in the state. We see the Meander School of Business put out a report that shows a dollar amount on that.
$6.9 billion, I think, if I remember right.
$6.9 billion. So we see a dollar amount and we see a quantified representation of that effect that the tribes are having. So have you seen those negotiations, those partnerships sort of grow with that status as well?
I think so. I think as the tribes have built what I would call capacity and leadership, and I don't want to fail to mention that. I'm seeing leadership development within the tribes. So, and I don't mean just the leader, the principal chief, or there's leadership that's being grown within the tribes. And so with that, you see capacity to deliver government services better. You see the capacity to look strategically, long-term, and plan, and do all those things that you would expect any government to do. And I think with that, I think that there's also been this natural partnership opportunities that have grown from that. And for example, and I probably overuse this example, but I'm going to use it again. Whenever the Macy's Logistics Center was opened in the Tulsa area about 2 years ago, that was a partnership between the Tulsa Chamber, the City of Tulsa, the City of Owasso, and the Cherokee Nation. Cherokee Nation came to the table and said, we want to try to help recruit, and I mean in recruiting this Macy's to come to the area. They were part of the team. And I have no doubt that made it extra special to the Macy's folks to have a tribe come in and they brought resources to the table, but they also brought, I think, a cultural awareness that was very important to Macy's. And so when we had the ribbon cutting, and I attended the ribbon cutting, you had, when you walked in the door, you had Tommy Wildcat playing the flute, and then you had symbols of native symbols throughout the Macy's Center there, and it was really a good experience. And I just use that as one of the best examples of partnership. And I think it's because of the growth in leadership and the growth in capacity, and the tribes being serious players. I mean, the best way to put it.
A lot of these instances are great successes. They are things we can be proud of. I would say the majority. There are, though, at times instances that come up that require you all and your department your attention. And we see things come up with, such as right now, a big thing is the city of Shawnee and the Potawatomi Nation there with the operation of their grocery stores and things like that. So those things do come up, and with us, the Muscogee Creek Nation, with legislation against the porch band of Creek Indians in Alabama, as it pertains to our Hickory Ground ceremonial with the building of a casino there. I'm sure you're aware of all of that's gone on with us, but what can you all do as a state agency when you come into those kind of instances or those problems like that? What can you do as a state agency to come in and sort of help that out?
Well, hopefully we can get in on the front end, and of course the Shawnee and the Citizen Potawatomi issue has been a longer term. It's not one that we've really at this point we've been able to really have much effect on, because there's already a lot of really negative, bad history between those two entities that I think they only work things out through the courts. But we would ideally, I'm going to say ideally, we would like to, if there are problems surfacing or tension, or we'd like to identify it early and try to work ahead, to resolve if it comes to that point. Fortunately, and I think along with that, I think it's important to build relationships now, so that we're already have a good rapport. We have a good, if you want to call it, routine, where we know each other well, and so that I think that'll take care of a lot of potential issues in the future. And if they do come up, I think it makes it easier to work them out.
And you've probably seen our struggle with the wanting to keep sacred sites sacred. Your thoughts on that, and our struggle there with the porch band and things that are going through with legislation and trying to find the carcieri fix, all kinds of things like that deal with land into trust issues. I suppose you may have an opinion on that, just as from your state agency standpoint.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one, it gets to the what I mentioned earlier about respect, and I think that there should be an awareness of any kind of encroachment issues or issues that involve native lands. That we have to be aware of, and we need to accommodate. There's got to be, and I don't want to sound naive in saying this, but I've always felt like there's a win-win in most situations. I'm sure there are some where there's just not, people just have to go at each other legally, but I'd like to think that there's a win-win in most situations, and I hope that in the future, if that were to be an issue in Oklahoma, I would hope that we would accommodate those sensitive areas and try to make sure that we acknowledge that, because it gets down to respect. And I mean, I have an example that's just kind of hit me the other day. I live in the Berry Hill area, which is actually Sand Springs city limits, and there's a shopping center over on Charles Page Boulevard in Sand Springs. That there's a creek cemetery that is right in the middle of the parking lot, and it's
still there.
It's still there, and
so
it
you
has
can do these things.
So I got to think you can do these things. I mean, surely it can be accommodated.
Well, and I appreciate you making those comments, because, as you said, been on the job about a year, and this is an issue with the creek and the porch band of creeks that's been going on for quite some time now. So I appreciate the comments there. Secretary Benge, anything we need to keep an eye on that you're excited about from you all's standpoint? I know the state coming through and another instance of let's find a happy solution with the American Indian Cultural Center and Museum. That looks to be well on its way now. So a lot of things in the future to look forward to.
Sure, I would add a fingers crossed to that, just because of where it, and Gary and I spoke about it on his radio show briefly. But the city of Oklahoma City and the Chickasaw Nation and the state have been trying to work out the final details, and it looks like it's on a good path. But I'm kind of a superstitious person in that, when I played baseball, you didn't talk about a no-hitter when a guy was pitching a no-hitter. You just don't. So you try to be careful, not jinx it. But no, I think it is. All kidding aside, I think it seems to be on a good path, and we're going to have a meeting next week where I hope I'm going to hear some good news. We'll find out. The other thing on the horizon, there's been a lot of discussion about healthcare partnerships between the tribes and the state, and in fact, the Healthcare Authority at Governor Fallon's direction has been working with CMS in Washington, the federal agency that administers Medicaid, to get a waiver that would, in essence, allow us to ensure more tribal citizens. So the tribes and the state would come together on this waiver, and basically it would be an insurance product underneath the under the Insure Oklahoma umbrella that would allow more tribal citizens to be insured. And I know that's a great priority for all tribal citizens, all the tribes.
In any election, that's like the top button there.
It
Healthcare.
is. It absolutely is. So that's we've been working on this for about a year, and as typical, the federal government's pretty slow on these things. So we're having to be patient, but also be very intentional and work on trying to accomplish that. I've been in discussions with Secretary or General Miles Deering, who is the Director of Veterans Affairs for the state of Oklahoma, and the Governor's Secretary of Veterans Affairs. So General Deering and I sat on the cabinet together with the Governor. He has expressed an interest, and I've been trying to assist in whatever way we can with reaching out to Native veterans. General Deering is hearing that many Native veterans are not taking advantage of the benefits that's afforded them, and he's trying to work on trying to grow those opportunities, and to also work with tribes to help them where they can deliver those services maybe more directly instead of having to always go through the federal government in a traditional way. So they would be certified as like a service organization, if I understand it right. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he's been working with the Creek Nation already on that.
We've actually filed a story not too long ago about those exact things and having a lot of the red tape removed from some of those, making it just a little bit, easing the process to get those benefits to those veterans. Yeah. And so, and I'm sure that you know about the proposed Native American Memorial maybe at the National Mall in Washington, D.C.
I have heard about
too.
that recently.
Yeah,
yes.
that'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
All right, well, with 147 meetings, we know you're a busy man, so we'll let you get out the door here. But thank you so much, Secretary Benge, for just taking a few moments to stop and chat with us here on Native News Today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You got it. And thanks again to Secretary of State Chris Benge for joining us. Also, the Secretary of Native American Affairs here in Oklahoma. Some great info there, some great insight, and a really candid interview. Want to thank him for that and for all the work that he's doing on the state level and for answering our questions here at Muskogee Media. Well, our next story really is an investigation piece looking into a lawsuit recently filed against the Muscogee Creek Nation, its housing authority, its acting housing director, and the principal chief of this nation, James Floyd. The lawsuit brought by plaintiff, Muscogee Creek citizen, veteran, Mr. Barney Ingram. Now, full disclosure for everybody out there at home, Mr. Ingram for a number of years is personal friend of mine. So I asked to be relieved from doing this interview. The interview, though, was conducted by Muskogee Media's Jessica McBride, and we have that interview for you now, as well as a little bit backstory about how the lawsuit came to be. On July 27th, Muscogee Creek citizen Barney Ingram filed a lawsuit in MCN District Court against the Muscogee Creek Nation Department of Housing, Acting Housing Secretary Alvin Bucktrott, and Principal Chief James Floyd. Court documents for the petition for relief allege breach of contract and slander of title complaints. The complaints described in the suit state the defendant constructed a home for the plaintiff around 1986 in a location not originally agreed upon by the parties. Around January 6th of this year, Ingram entered into a contract with Housing for MCN to purchase the property back because of the home's location. The documents state under the slander of title complaint, the plaintiff knew and acknowledged the home was built by the MCN Housing Department in a place that was not agreed upon by the parties and placed the propane bottle too close to the house in violation of state and federal law. The documents state the propane company will no longer deliver propane to the property because the tank location violates state and federal regulations. Also alleged is the mistake has and is currently causing Ingram extreme distress and lack of use and enjoyment of his property. The complaint alleges that around March 18th, Bucktrott breached the contract by canceling the agreement with Ingram by phone call. Subsequent meetings in person between the parties have yielded the same result. Also included in the documents are allegations that after experiencing issues with the home and a neighbor around 2015, Ingram requested assistance from Housing. The department allegedly had the property surveyed in February 2016 without the plaintiff's knowledge. The complaint states that the completed survey conflicts with what Ingram and the neighbor have believed is the property line since the home was built, and that it was published with malice and ill will toward the plaintiff. The plaintiff is requesting damages of $150,000, interest on the amount from July 31st to the date of judgment, attorney fees, and court costs. Muscogee Media requested a statement from Creek Nation Public Relations regarding the case. PR Acting Director G-Bon Gouch declined to comment, citing ongoing litigation issues. At the time of the filing of the lawsuit, lead counsel for the plaintiff requested an interview be conducted with Muscogee Media.
First of all, I'd like to thank y'all for having me. And well, my name is Barney Ingram. I'm a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation. Be 68 years old my next birthday. I retired as an industrial X-ray engineer. Played music around here for like the last 40 years. Played in a little band called Medicine Pony. And like a lot of the citizens my age, we're starting to see the things that we were promised haven't been holding up, and I think I can speak for a lot of people my age and our citizenship that are very disgruntled. And somebody's got to say something. Just basically, why is this every administration we go through the same thing? Like I said earlier, the definition of insanity is do the same thing over and over and over, expecting different results, and you're not going to get them. And me, like a lot of other citizens that had problems with their homes, and I've had problems for 25 years, one thing or another, be it the driveway or the propane tank not lined up where it ought to be, the highlight, a neighbor not having their driveway like it ought to be, and they're basically still driving through my yard, Just a lot of stuff that, needs to be brought to the surface and looked at, and why aren't these people being helped like they ought to be,
Talk a little bit about why you're here today.
Well, like I said, I'm here because the discrepancies in my home, just the boundaries, the agreements we had with the neighbor, the people, housing especially, I've approached them. We've, at one time, can I say this? We had a contract signed by the sitting Secretary of Housing, and I was told to go find another home because that house was just in, bad shape. And so I'd been looking for 2 or 3 weeks, every day. And then the sitting secretary gets replaced by another secretary, and he tells me there's no contract anymore. He knows my problem. They went and served, it's all been taken care of. Told the chief, don't worry about it. And I said, well, if it's been taken care of, he said, your propane tank. I said, the propane company told me they said they couldn't deliver me no more propane. Simply by the fact that a gentleman from the propane company, university or wherever, he comes up the day they were looking at my house, the housing department, they were giving an estimate on what it would cost, my house is worth, and this gentleman told me that my propane tank was too close to my house. Then there's highline wires going across. He said that's is very not in code, and he said that's subject to fines.
You've had some discrepancies, and you've got some questions, and are trying to get things fixed with your home and your property. What have you done?
Well, I've taken it to the housing director to do the right thing, and it obviously hasn't been done. So now I've had to file a
A lawsuit?
Yes, against the chief and the director of the housing, because it's obvious that there's so many people out there that are in this same situation, and they just keep putting them off. And the Indian way is to don't say nothing, let it go. And we got to say something, because if we don't, it's just going to pass on to our children and our grandkids. And at the chance of being blackballed, I feel like I've got to say this. I've got to do it for our kids, you know. As far as financially, a lot of people like me feel like we get a D for our financial business interactions and taking care of our people. A D, you know. If you're working at the Creek Nation, you're there because our citizens. Flat out. Your job is here because you have citizen people. And if you got another agenda other than helping those people, then you don't need to be here.
What do you hope comes out from filing this lawsuit against the nation?
Well, actually, there's, you know, I'm doing it because of my situation, but I'm doing it because I want people to know that it's not okay just to be quiet, and it's not okay to let it go. There's actions you can take. Those particular people are here because we put them there, and they're there because of us. And their main job should be to help the people, and a lot of elderly are disgruntled. They feel about the same way I do, a lot of them.
For a copy of the lawsuit and continuing coverage of the story, please visit MuskogeeMedia.com. And there was the statement from Mr. Barney Ingram as the plaintiff bringing suit against the Muscogee Creek Nation, the acting housing director, Mr. Alvin Bucktrott, and the principal chief, James Floyd, each in their own capacities as their titles in this nation. So we look to have this resolved. It's something that we are covering very closely, and wanted to be able to share that with the citizens out there too that need information on it and wanted to hear that statement. So I want to thank all of them, for not only our guests this week for coming in, being a part of us here at Muscogee Media, putting together this episode of Native News Today. And I wanted to let everybody out there know that is a smaller cut of that interview with Mr. Ingram. His full statement is available on MuskogeeMedia.com. We have a new story up there with not only a written story on his case, but also the full statement. So I want to thank Barney for coming in. Also, Mr. Chris Benge, the Secretary of State of Oklahoma, for being with us this week as well. As I told you, a lot of great content on our social media sites. Follow Muscogee Media, Muscogee Nation News, and Native News Today, all on Facebook and Twitter. And we're on Snapchat and Instagram. Look for us all over the place. You guys have a great week. We'll see you next time.